email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Today's guest is someone who doesn't just talk about change, she teaches people how to lead it. She's a strategic coach to high performers, a trusted advisor to Fortune 100 executives, a keynote speaker who stood on stages inspiring thousands, and a former senior leader at Accenture who's made it her life work to help lead people with intention. She's also the author of Make Waves, Be the One to Start Change at Work and in Life, a book that's been praised for helping everyday leaders step up, speak out, and spark real transformation even without a title. Her insights are deeply human, and whether she's talking about momentum, influence, or overcoming imposter syndrome, which is something I'll talk about later, she leaves you believing that you are capable of more than you think. I'm really excited to welcome Patti Johnson to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And the other thing I might add to that, Clint, that might be relevant to the conversation is I was also for about 15 years, founder and CEO of PeopleResults, which is a change consulting company. So the interesting thing about this topic of change is it gave me the opportunity not only to, was I learning as I was leading my team, but also get to see so many leaders up close and what was hard for them and what was easy around the whole topic of change. So I'll bring that perspective as well.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Sure, you bet.
So I'll start off with the same question for everybody. I like to think of the people who come on the show as superheroes, and every superhero has an origin story. So What's yours?
Man, superhero, that's a pretty high hurdle. And I think mine probably kind of grew up small town in Oklahoma, Ponca City. World was really small, and I just I wasn't one of those people that had it all figured out. I just kind of step by step kind of took the next thing and the next challenge. I think being at Accenture was really good for me because I kind of got to look around and the standards were high, the people were smart, and it kind of learned how to do hard stuff, I think. And then when I started my consulting business, probably I even still can't believe I did it. It was for me, that was my most superhero-y thing, was taking a risk of doing something. And when I'm not a big risk taker, honestly, and starting a business and just jumping out and doing that, in addition to just family. I'm a big, my anchor is my family, their foundation is family. So I think that coupled with just trying to figure stuff out as I go. There was no big master plan. I was not one of these people that started out at 21 and I knew every single thing I was going to do. I just didn't. I figured it out as I went. So I don't know if that qualifies superhero status, but that's
no, it does.
Great. Yeah.
You weren't going to rule the world by 30, in other words.
No. Yeah.
But I remember in the book you talked about it, the decision to start your own business was one that weighed on you. And I think it took you 2-3 years before you finally pulled the trigger.
Yeah, it did. I did. I know you're an engineer, Clint. I don't have an engineer brain necessarily, but I am one of these people that if there's a new challenge in front of me, information gives me comfort. So what I did is I thought, well, I'm going to have to get really smart. I started about this topic. I talked to everyone who had started a business and learned what to do, as well as I thought some people that things they did, I thought it's really not me. It worked for them. It wouldn't work for me. But all of a sudden I started feeling more and more confident and more and more confident. And then I had a strategy when I did start the business, a little bit of a mind fake of, okay, I'm going to experiment, which is a very important part of change. I'm going to experiment for a year. And I set kind of low expectations, which is not my strength. I'm tended to, we can do this and everything. The low expectations. And then I thought at the end of the year, I'll know. You know what I mean? So I did some things to help me get comfortable taking the risk, I guess.
Okay. I think a couple of places you talk about that in the book where don't be a perfectionist, I think is one of the traits that can get you in trouble. And I like, you talk about being over-prepared. I like to be over-prepared. Like I told you in the green room that we won't go through all my questions because I like to show up with way more than I need because I don't want to be unprepared. So,
I think that's a really important point worth touching on because all of us who are those type A, everything has to be great. That's our expectation. In times of change, it's almost like being over-prepared is almost in conflict because think about most changes. It could be a merger, an acquisition. You're offering new services. You're learning as you go. You need to be learning as you go. So, I kind of early in my career, I thought if you changed your project plan, you'd kind of screwed up, right? You messed it up. Why didn't you figure this out? Why didn't you know? And you have to really change that. So if you are, and I'm one of them too, Clint, so I can relate to you. If you are the over preparer, everything has to be perfect or it's not good enough, then in times of high change, that can undermine you. So that is a watch out. And I'm sure you've experienced it and you've seen it with other leaders as well. But that's an important point to make because it goes against all those things that we've grown up believing to be true,
Yeah, I think you can hold both beliefs. I like to come in over prepared, but I also know that perfection is the enemy of good enough. And there's a certain level of quality that says we can move on. And you can iterate forever to try to get perfection and never actually get there. So
absolutely. And by the way, I'm not saying I always prepare. Always.
Oh yeah, sure.
I've done 20 times. But I do think, if you are believing that preparation is going to give you all the answers, that's the watch out, I think,
Yeah, for sure. You never know it all.
No, you can't.
So what inspired you to write Make Waves? Was there like a specific moment or experience that sparked the idea? What led to it?
I think it was a combination of things for me. It was one of those where I had so many thoughts in my head. For me, in my own experience, if you think about what are the times in your life that were the hardest, usually it is a change, whether it is relocating because of spouse and you didn't really want to go there, but it was the right answer for your family. It was a divorce. It was a loss of someone you loved. It was, those are all the many personal examples. Professionally, being thrown in to do something you had no idea how to do. There was no plan. An acquisition when you really didn't want it. Leadership change. We could go on and on. And most people, if you list the times that were the toughest, there was a big change that you were working your way through. And so I thought about it a lot personally. And then I started seeing with my clients, it was like that was the thing that was tripping them up the most, those big changes, because just doing the basics, everybody was okay with that. And I think it kind of like, I wanted an outlet to put my ideas and thoughts together. And so I decided that's what I wanted to do. And I did the same thing that I did when I started my business. I started just talking to everybody and ended up getting an agent and a publisher. And, because it was all new to me. You've been through it, but I got to tell you, the whole publishing gig at that time when I did it was like another land. I had been in the business world and, it was slow and it took time and it was another land, but it was a great thing for me to pull out those thoughts and put them to paper. So it was a little bit of something that built up over time. I can't say there was one incident. There's some stories I could tell you of things that really shaped my thinking, but it would kind of like just a desire to do it and get it out in the world, I think, that kind of got me going.
Did you have a specific person in mind, like a type of person you wrote this for? And if so, how do you hope it changes the way they operate?
Right. I thought of anyone really who is leading any kind of change. It could be on an individual level. It could be in your community. It could be someone in companies and in big organizations. A lot of the principles are pretty foundational of, I use the term Wavemaker, people who start changes and how did they do it? That was my other thing that was kind of wonky for me. I was always fascinated when I saw something really good had happened or, a plant had grown in the concrete. How did that happen? Where did that begin? And it's really interesting. You start getting it down. I go, well, no, but where did that start? Well, before that, did someone have an idea? And so that whole thing really got me curious. And to this day, that's something that I am always interested in is how did you start that business? How did you pull it off? The beginnings of the change and how you actually came about it, that was what I ended up creating something called the Wavemaker DNA from that. To me, I don't know, it's very interesting.
Oh, it's very interesting. We're going to have a question about the Wavemaker DNA coming up. So trust me. Yeah, the whole weed growing in the concrete reminds me, there's a trail not far from the office here. When I walk it, There's right as you go to an underpass, there's this massive concrete wall, and there's a tree. I mean, a massive, good sized tree growing out of the side of that thing. And you're like, how does it?
What?
Okay. Anytime I think I'm going to quit, that thing didn't give up. I can't give up either.
Exactly. That is the image that you have. I understand for sure.
And you mentioned Wavemaker, and you use the metaphor of making waves to kind of describe leading change. And so in your words, what does it mean to be a wavemaker?
Someone who is willing to create something that didn't exist before. Could be small scale. It could be changing the way your ICU nursing unit group works. It could be starting a business. Picturing something that is different than it is today. And then the hard part, taking the steps to actually make it happen. The other thing that's in one of the chapters in the book is when the wave comes to you. So as we all know, back to some of the examples I gave, there's sometimes the wave comes knocking on your door and that is not really what you had in mind. I talked to a friend yesterday and her company is going to be acquired and she's not really happy about it. And so, well, that's a change she's going to have to deal with, but she didn't really choose it. So, changes sometimes come from these ideas we have in our head, and sometimes they come with just life. It just happened,
You have a story of someone who kind of made waves and transformed their team or their organization? Mm-hmm. Somebody comes to mind as like your poster child for this?
There are a lot of them. I think some of them were like, I can think of like Bruce Ballingy, who started Paraveda Solutions. He really wanted to had this image of a company that was really focused on growth and development, not just profit. And of course, you have to have a well-run business and everything. But, he said about creating a company that was really it was all about development and learning. And I can remember the first time I went to one of the annual meetings. So how many annual meetings have you been to with companies, right? There's the strategy and there's the slides of here's what the financial objectives are and how are we going to get them and how are we going to, and this one was all development. It was all around helping people learn and teaching, which is a whole different thing. And so that was an example, on a smaller scale, there was an example of someone one of my favorite stories, of a woman who she had her son was in her daughter was in a school for learning disadvantaged kids. And one day the owners of the school, they loved it. The parents loved it. The owners came in and said, we're going to close the school. And she was not an educator. And she decided someone's going to have to step up and it's going to have to be me. And so that Chase's Place, which is a school in Richardson here at North Dallas, it is alive today because 10, 12 years ago, she said she was fearless, right? I'll figure this out. I don't know how to do this, but I know I can find the people around me to do it. So that, to me, that's one that's really different. Some really different kinds of stories, huge scale. And then something that was just like, that was an example. The change came to her. She was sitting there going, oh, geez, got to do something.
God bless her, man, because I have a special needs kid, and if those schools are tough to come by for sure. And if they go away, it's bad. That's
exactly what she said to me. She's like, I couldn't face. I think for her, it was like looking for an alternative when the parents loved this school and her daughter was thriving. The choice of that or figuring out how to make this work and getting some parents, she did it.
Yeah.
Amazing story, amazing woman. So
that's a great one.
A lot of those. Yeah.
Now you have a lot of great visuals when I read the book, or I visualize them. There maybe not pictures in the book, but early in the book you talk about what when you say what's in your backpack, and of course as soon as I read that, I immediately thought of that movie with George Clooney and Up in the Air, and he's got the backpack that he's doing the presentation at, and he leaves to go meet the girl. But what does it mean? What's in your backpack?
Well, I think in the second edition of my book, that's probably what I put more effort into. And what's in your backpack? It is everything that we carry with us. And it is back to our backpack. Like if you looked in my backpack, you'd see a lot of perfectionism. You'd see someone who's pretty hard on themselves. You'd see somebody who has high expectations, somebody who wants everything to be copacetic. I want everybody to be happy and to be good. Okay, so I know those things about me. So that means, though, I have to know what I'm carrying around with me. Back to what we were talking about a minute ago. If you're a perfectionist and you're really hard on yourself, guess what? You're in a change that's flying mile a minute. Right now, let's talk about some of the leaders right now that are trying to figure out what's going on in the market. Okay. So you've got retailers that are going, what do I do? If you're trying to make sure everything's perfect or I didn't do my job, you're undermining yourself there. So it's almost like I kind of learned over time what's going on up here. You'd think this would be obvious, but all the behavioral scientists would know this. Is anything that's going on in your head is driving how you show up as a leader. It's driving how you communicate and the conversations you have. And so you have to know what those are. One of my other triggers is I'm a planner. Great quality. It sounds like you are too, Clint. Love a good plan. But one of my watch outs is in times of high change, you're going to be changing the plan. You're going to have 100%. To be updating it always. What did we learn last week that we didn't know before? I know you talk a lot about agility in your work. Incredibly important. But if you've got those things that you've carried with you since you were a kid, sometimes your backpack might undermine you. I might mention one other thing. I'll speak of a leader that I've worked with. Her backpack was she couldn't screw up. Not getting into too much of her personal story. She was third daughter. The older two daughters were the superstars, and she's coming in behind them. And you kind of realize after you got to know her, so it caused her to be very risk averse, stayed in a job too long because she didn't want to change. And the risk was too big. So that's a very personal example of someone who had something in their backpack that was really affecting their decisions as a leader and, their success. I don't know. Does that help give you enough?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think I'm glad you brought up the planning piece because that's an important, at least in my world, it's an important thing to talk about in that people often think that plans don't change, and nothing could be further from the truth. We've had the privilege of working on every Olympic planning event for Coca-Cola since 1992.
Wow, that's impressive.
And yet I can promise you that those plans, even though we've done them for 40 years, they're different each time and they change every other week. That's because things are different. People get sick. There are new regulations. There are something you didn't know about a month ago, you now know about, like you talked about. It's going to change. To think that it won't change is being unrealistic. So.
Right. And ineffective.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Our brains are efficient or lazy. I'll let you pick the word you like best. Yeah. And they like to look for patterns. And I've seen those memes online where it'll show you a statement, you read it, and then it says, oh, by the way, did you notice these words were reversed? I actually got my phone out one time because I thought for sure they were tricking me and changing them, right? Yeah. There's no way my brain missed this. And so the brain also likes habits, and some are helpful, but you point out that some can get in our way. What are some of those issues?
Well, habits are very powerful. Yes, I totally know our brain looks for the most efficient path. That can cause us to not learn something new because it's a lot faster. I already know how to do it. I don't need to learn the new way. It can cause us to even just how you spend your time. So as an example, you talk a lot on conversations. In times of high change, there's a pretty good chance your team is going to need more from you for them to be effective. Not just a feel-good move, but they're trying to figure out, oh, wait, the way we used to do it doesn't work anymore. So if you're spending your time, you're playing, I'm the efficiency person, and I don't have enough time to meet and talk with my team one-on-one, those habits are driving you. They're at the wheel, and you are sitting in the back seat. And so, I think we all, I will say for me, that's something I really have to work on is like, what are my habits because habits, you don't even think about it anymore, right? You just drive to work and, I don't know how I got here. I didn't remember driving here. That we've all done that on a variety of things. And the other thing is being very curious in times of change is important. In your habits, if you are on rote all the time, you're not noticing, that's really different than, you talk about your example of Coca-Cola, a regulation change, or maybe, they've changed, this location's really different. And what we did before isn't going to work. So I just think that habits they can help us, but they can also be big underminers.
Absolutely. And the body, so I think the brain is the organ that uses the most energy.
Yeah.
And so it's always trying to cheat though and take the easy way out if it can. So.
Always. It's like the classic one of where, I'm going to work out every day after work. I'm going to do it. And then you're like, that's really not what we really, we like to go home and see what's on Netflix. So those patterns are very, very powerful. And it takes, Atomic Habits is one of the classic books. I've read that probably 3 times. But it is one of the classic ones about how you actually change human behavior. And if you're trying to do something different, it's going to take those small decisions along the way, the actions that will be different.
Now, what separates the wave makers who can drive meaningful change, like you've been talking about, from those who are kind of hesitate or feel stuck? And you actually have this thing you talk about, Wavemaker DNA, and there was 4 quadrants, if I recall, and there was 2 or 3 properties in each one. So, what do you think?
Well, I think there are several things. Let me just a few of the highlights in terms of the categories. I think it's kind of goes in line with what we talked about. Adaptive persistence is kind of my term for what I found. And those 2 words can feel in conflict. But just like we've been talking about, being adaptable, but also being persistent. If you think I'm adaptable, on one end of the spectrum, you're somebody that's changing your mind every day. You know what you're doing. But if you're persistent, sometimes people think of that as somebody that's taken the hill. I'm not looking back. I've already decided this is what I'm doing. You're looking for that ability to do exactly what you just said, Clint. Like, I'm going to figure this out as I go. What do I have learned that I didn't know before? What needs to be updated and changed? That is the expected behavior, not a mistake. And so I think people that have that ability to move without all the answers. And I love one of the quotes, actually, Tammy Pinkston said that's always stuck with me is, in times of high change, if you have all the answers, you've waited too long. And to me, that's so true, isn't it? Back to our perfectionist tendencies. So adaptable persistence. Also, I think positive collaborators. There aren't very many changes, except for things within yourself, right? But there aren't very many changes that are, it's really not a solo sport. You've got to have other people along with you. And so figuring out, how do I collaborate in a positive way toward an intent, toward a purpose, bring people in. And then the other thing worth mentioning, and I think this is one of the things that's forgotten the most in business today, and that's being a voracious learner. I know when I do workshops, I ask people well, what gets in your way from that? Well, we don't have time. We don't have time anyway. And our attention span has gone from, I think it's like if you're 6 years old, it's like, 10 times what it is when you're 40. Because we already know everything, right? We already have it. We figured it out. And so people who are curious, voracious, make time to learn. People right now that are not out there soaking up how AI is going to affect their business and how they work. It's like, that's not efficient. That's probably not very smart. So that learning ability is super, super important. I could go into more details, but there are people who they kind of there was a theme to it. The other thing that was super interesting to me when I was doing my research, I sort of thought, okay, well, there'll be the senior executives. They'll be one way. The entrepreneurs will be another way. And the college students or the younger, they'll be another way. Not so. I found that there was a commonality in the things in the research, much more commonality than there were differences, which was surprising to me, honestly.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's a good surprise, but it was.
I think when I teach classes, one of the things I always ask is, we talk about perfect knowledge, and they say the only project for which you have perfect knowledge is the one that's finished.
Oh, for
So
sure.
you can't wait for perfect information. You'll never get started, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you brought up two things. I wanted to talk about them, and I didn't know where to weave them in, so I just kind of have them plugged to the side. Now I can talk about them.
All right.
One is a quote that you from let me find it here, from Rich Sheridan, founder of Menlo Innovations, who said, "There are very few individual heroes anymore." And what he was talking about was what you were just talking about, which is people seek purpose, and we're kind of wired to leave the world a better place than we found it. But because the world is so complex, that's usually a team exercise and not something we could do by ourselves.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's right. I think, I always tell people if your tendency, back to what's in your backpack, if you're that person who's a procrastinator and like to, like in finals, you're going to stay up the night before and you're going to get that presentation looking great. And the slides are going to be perfect and you're going to have your talk points, but you haven't really tested your ideas with anybody yet. You've undermined yourself. Your team doesn't know what you're doing. So people who are like, they are very self-reliant, which is a beautiful quality. But if you are totally self-reliant and I got this, I got it figured out, I can do it, in times of high change, you are working against yourself.
You've given a couple of examples already, but I'll just ask one more time. So what are some of the common obstacles to starting change?
Action is the biggest.
Not wanting to?
Not knowing how. Feeling too big. I'll give you my own example. I'll go back to my example of starting a business. I told you it took me a couple of years to get up the courage to do it. Well, what finally got me on my path, the real path, maybe that last year, was feeling overwhelmed and feeling it was too much. And I had been in this, Accenture's huge global management consulting company. It's huge. And, all this stuff around you. And so what finally got me going was, this is what I always advise clients, what can I do today? What can I do this week? Might be small, and for me, it was, I'm going to go meet who are the people that I think could probably offer some guidance to me. And I made a list. And then I said, okay, I'm going to try every week to meet. I had a busy schedule, very demanding at the time. I'm going to try every week to talk to, have coffee with, phone call about 3 people a week. So that was that sounds really small for somebody who's thinking, I want to start a consulting business. But it was the impetus. I've had multiple examples of that in my career. And when I have advised and coached other people that are feeling stuck, often they know what they want to do, but
right,
daunting.
First step is always the hardest.
The hardest, and there's a bunch of stuff mixed into that first step. It's fear of failure. It is fear of looking stupid. It is fear of not being able to actually do it. So back to the backpack, depending on the person, there can be a variety of reasons why, we all like to be cozy, comfortable, right? We all like easy. Well, easy is staying stuck right where you are. And so that's, pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a little bit of the imposter syndrome too. I know that I was doing a seminar for Georgia Tech in the Double E program. And one of the things I asked about was imposter syndrome. And I said, unless you're a narcissist where you're pretty sure everything you've ever done has been the perfect thing ever done. Mm-hmm. I said, even look, I'm old and I still sometimes think, am I the right person? Is this the right fit? Can I do it? And it's human nature to have some doubt, some self-doubt.
Yeah. It's funny. The whole imposter syndrome thing, of course, it's funny. It's often applied. The conversation often comes up with women leaders, which I don't really like. But I do think, to me, imposter syndrome is a little stronger than I think what you're talking about. Questioning yourself, doubting, do I have this right? Is it, that's healthy. That, like you said, means I'm not a narcissist. And it means also if you're doing something brand new, it's all fake. If you think you have it perfect, you do not. And so I think it's healthy. Although the word imposter is like, sometimes that word sounds like you're not supposed to be there. So in some ways I don't use that term much, but, and it's funny. There was a documentary on Martha Stewart, and they asked her, they said, Martha, did you ever have imposter syndrome? She's like, no, I didn't have imposter syndrome. I knew I'd figure it out and I'd get it done, and I loved that, because that was the other thing that is a real common in Wavemakers is you may not have all the answers, but you believe I will figure it out. Whereas imposter kind of means I really shouldn't be here. I don't belong here. And that's way further down the spectrum than questioning yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Mm. Now, you also emphasize that anyone, not just those who lead, can be a catalyst for change. And
sure.
What do you think holds most people back from stepping into that role?
Not my job, not my place. What do I have to do with that? And, I found that there were a lot of people who did take on change, but often it was through small things. Maybe it was bringing a topic into a leadership meeting, recommending a topic. I think we should have a speaker come in and talk to us about this is something we're all facing. Wouldn't it be interesting to have somebody? Or let me show you something I've learned, and start to bring some of the resistors around you, or people that do think they already have all the answers. And there's a great story in there of Lindsay Pender, who was an ICU nurse, pediatric ICU nurse, and she had come out of a really top hospital in Philly for pediatric, I think it's CHOP. And she had been at the extreme of, the latest technology and everything that was done for newborns. And she had, or premature babies. And she came to a hospital that was a smaller hospital. Everybody was committed and everything. They just didn't have the information. And she saw some processes and some of their procedures that she knew needed to be updated. And she set about doing it. And it was through just getting other people sharing. She didn't come across as better than them. And she was very, very thoughtful in how she went about it, and masterful, really. More than maybe she even realized at the time, of bringing other people along without thinking less of them or talking down to them. But you've got to, I think, you can't, what can I do? What are the actions I can take to try to influence some change? We've all seen that happen around us.
It sounds like she was a good example of my next question. So maybe we don't have to go through it, but how can team members influence change without formal authority? So she wasn't the head nurse. She wasn't the lead. Yeah.
No authority. I think it's through communication, education, being willing to bring in new ideas, sharing what you've learned, putting forth an idea. Have we thought about? Here's something to think about. You got to be willing to push could be too hard, but you got to be willing to introduce some new ideas if you don't have any authority, and set a standard. I can think of somebody on our team a long time ago who she really influenced change just by how she showed up, how she did her work, how the quality of the work that she did, how she did it, that upped everybody's game. And she was the youngest on the team.
Well, that concludes part one of my conversation with Patti Johnson, founder and former CEO of PeopleResults and best-selling author of Make Waves. Coming up in part two of our discussion, Patti gives advice to leaders on how to handle resistance during times of change.
Leaders often want to suppress resistance, right? Want to squash it, but it's going to be there. So I would say, invite it in, understand it. Now, it doesn't mean you allow people to be, every meeting we have, everybody's going to complain, but structure it. What is it about that? Be really, more research-based. Okay, well, let's talk about that. You said this won't work. Let's talk, okay, why? What about it? What would make it work? Really be very fact-based, and don't be afraid of resistance, because you may think you can squash it, pretty good chance it's just going to pop up.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to ClintonMPaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.